Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Laura Gay, and I will be the moderator for today's YAR Research to Action session for the Global Wellbeing team. Welcome back to everyone who was here with us yesterday during the knowledge session, and we're so excited to have some new faces here as well. Again, as a bit of background about me, I'm from the United States and I'm earning a bachelor's degree in public health at Penn State University. And I'm working on the coordination team of the Youth as Researchers Initiative in response to COVID-19. So before giving you a rundown of what today's session will look like, some big takeaways from our meeting yesterday was this multifaceted approach to understanding well-being and how youth well-being was impacted during COVID-19, particularly with events such as school closures, the transition to online learning and its impact on mental health, concern over health outcomes for youth themselves and their family, but at the same time, a positive opportunity for time alone and reflection, which was also identified during one of our Asia and the Pacific regional sessions. We also had some live polls to engage the audience who shared they experienced disruption to sleep quality, increased feelings of depression due to higher levels of online activity, an impacted social life, and a need for better mental health policies, better university counseling, and financial aid during COVID-19. We also had some great questions from the audience, so hopefully we can continue that today. They were largely future focused, so preparing for future pandemics, and policy focused. So in terms of some initial policy discussion from yesterday, there was discussion around whether mental health should be integrated into the education or universities or healthcare systems, as well as the individual's role in addition to government prioritizing mental health policy and integrating it into different areas of work. So today's session will provide an opportunity for our researchers, but also our public audience to interact with policy experts. So it will be a dialogue that enables discussion on the best way to turn the research findings into action and policy. But before diving into today's session, I want to introduce you to our panelists who will be engaging in this exchange with us today. And I know right now we have Mr. Mulba Johnson. So welcome. If you want to take the floor now and introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background, that would be great.
Well, thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
You
so
are.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Emmanuel Mulba Johnson, not just Mulba Johnson. I don't know whether the Zoom captured my first name, Emmanuel Mulba Johnson, and I work with the government of Liberia. I'm the Assistant Minister for Youth Development at the Ministry of Youth and Sports, and I got my graduate degree. My undergraduate from the University of Liberia, and then I went to the United States. I graduated from the University of Chicago, Harris School of Public Policy. And so I'm so honored to be here representing the government of Liberia to discuss the impact of COVID on the young people. I have my own perspective. There are a lot of things been going on back home here. And I appreciate the moderating board and the team out there for the excellent research done. And I too have been in Chicago Policy Lab, and I know to some extent where research can carry on how far. And I just love to share my perspective of things going forward. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So now to describe the session a little bit more. I think we do have our other speaker on. If Mr. Ranjesh Prakash, are you there? If you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, that would be wonderful.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, and just checking, can you see me as well? Because I think I just dropped out. I'm having poor internet. Oh, okay. Can you see me now?
Yes, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry. I'm having internet issues over here. But anyways, hi, my name is Ranjesh Prakash, and I'm a current employee of SPC, and I'm the Human Rights and Social Development Officer at SPC at the same division. And as you can see that if you don't know, I am vision impaired. That means I have a disability. I cannot see. Always using the politically correct term. My expertise, I am attending this session and I hope to bring my expertise, which is in the disability arena. And I specialize in access to information for persons with disabilities, especially those individuals who are blind and vision impaired. So that's it about that's it from my side, and I'm looking forward to interacting with you all soon. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for those introductions. So like I said, in order to describe the session a little bit more and how we can engage with these two policy experts. So we'll be using something called the fishbowl methodology today. And it's essentially where you are able to enter the circle of speakers in this, what we'll call a fishbowl, to ask questions and engage in discussion with these policy experts. So we already have some youth researchers initially signed up for the first fishbowls here to get in their questions. But if any of our public audience is interested in coming up and taking a seat in the fishbowl, please write in the chat your name, your question, and then also use the raise hand function. So those three things are really key if you want to participate. So again, your name, your question, and then make sure to use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. Then at some point in the debate, I'll call on you during the fishbowl discussion to take the floor with video and audio if you're able to ask the question and engage. So again, our YAR participants, our researchers are going first, but if you already know you're interested, please follow the raise hand function, writing your name and question into the chat, and we'll be sure to bring you up. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Ruth, Abdul, Afifa, Max, and Aisha. If you're all here, if you want to turn on video and audio, and the floor is yours to begin asking questions. And I'll ask our audience to give us a few seconds to bring them up to the stage as well. Welcome. I see Afifa, Ruth, Abdul. I'm waiting on a few more still. But if the three of you want to start off, if you have any questions in mind to begin this exchange today.
Okay, I guess I'm going to go first. Thank you, Laura. I'm Ruth. I'm a PhD student from the University of New Brunswick, Canada. And so I'm a member of the Global World team, and we have been researching. Our research primarily was on youth and their well-being as it pertains to their well-being, their education, how the COVID-19 has impacted their well-being, their education, their social interaction, and some other areas. And so my question for the panelists today is that how does this research on youth and well-being pre and post COVID-19, how does it align with their own policies and plans on global youth development in general? Thank you.
So Mr. Johnson or Mr. Prakash, if you want to share your any thoughts here.
Yeah, okay, can I jump in quick or?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so let me say thanks for the question. Again, we have been not just as a policymaker, we were fortunate to have attended a research school, and again, we know to what extent research can take us moving forward. By and large, we think the research is because after our opportunity to have graduated from policy school, we have come back with new perspectives of things and how our intervention should be research driven. So I think to a larger extent, especially with education, what we are experiencing here, your research is correct. There are more young people who have missed on the possibility of in-person classes. and the COVID having them online has created, to some extent, a serious situation of mental instability. So moving forward, looking at Liberia perspectives of things, it is not just that online, for example, we don't have the sophistication of equipment, technology. So it was so, I mean, not just a surprise, but a serious shock to us, because it became difficult to transition from in-person to online. So to be online, it means that you must probably have the opportunity to a good internet facility. And not most of our schools have the opportunity to internet. So it's a tough call for us. And young people experience being out of school a serious number of times before the system try to put itself together to give them opportunity to even attend an online program. So from a policy perspective, education, health, employment, the key focus for us from Liberia has been, because I don't want to jump in on sub-Saharan Africa, but for Liberia, we have experienced this situation of, for example, our country population is 65% youthful population. So of the 5 million population we have, 65% of those population are young people. So the concern and the focus has always been employability. So the labor market experienced a serious decline, just as the International Labour Organization came down with the statistics of a decline in labor market absorption. Similar with Liberia, we experienced a deep decline because some of those measures, when the COVID came, we took in serious measures. Like, for example, we closed borders, we reduced attendance in school was closed absolutely. Later on, we tried to reopen school, reduce attendance in school. All of the public institutions, government institutions, as well as private institutions, government issue a regulation that there must be a decline in workforce. So young people experience this serious numbers of unemployment. So, like, again, Liberia is not like the West, or Europe, that have the opportunity where you have a very active unemployment package that will be given to these young people while they are outside of the employment cycle. So we have experienced this deep shock, and that has been the real focus, because poverty to a larger extent increased because young people do not have the opportunity to fetch out resources in order to take care of themselves and their families. Our country has experienced this almost 50 years of civil war, which has already created a serious situation in terms of education, in terms of health, and as well as employment. So the COVID just added to the pre-existing conditions that was experienced by young people. So there are too many ways for the West. They were coming up with this whole safety net theme with Liberia. We alarm ourselves, but in a different way of a stimulus for not just young people, but the population at large. And there were targeted communities that those supplies were given to. So by and large, the research is such that it falls in direct perspective to what we are experiencing as a country. And some of those interventions, for example, the World Bank have come to our aid, and like you talk about health, situation, mental health that young people are experiencing. The World Bank is working with the Ministry of Education. They have looked at the issue of guardians counselor in the different schools in order to help young people who experience this trauma. And the shock of the COVID, it's not just that, like I said, mentally or has had an impact educationally, negatively on them transitioning to the labor market, but it has had a severe impact in terms of poverty, the situation of poverty. And government has, the whole situation has pushed us back to engage differently, engaging differently in the perspective of looking at safety net, looking at programs, targeted programs that are directly affecting young people, their well-being, in terms of funding food, to eat. Those are the specific, giving them the business skills, employability skills. That is the exact target of what, of how Liberia has taken on, the perspective of things. So I could pause a little bit, and then maybe we could have some other persons jumping in. But I think I have this whole flip side of it, because when we in a time that we experienced the COVID, ECOWAS has worked with one of our biggest youth organizations called the Federation of Liberian Youth. We have put young people together and so that they can express themselves about the impact the COVID has had on them. And then we have that paper available. We will also share with with you guys on the platform, so that you can have an opportunity to look deep into what we have experienced back here in Liberia.
Yeah, thank you very much. As a follow-up, because I'm from Nigeria, a part of sub-Saharan Africa, and so as a member of sub-Saharan Africa and someone from Liberia, how do we best prepare, so that if any of these things happen in the future, like in case of any other pandemic or any other unforeseen circumstances, how do we prepare to have our youth not fall into this scenario as we currently have about unemployment and having to deal with financial problems and economic problems in general and mental well-being? So how do you think we can do that?
Yes, to jump in on that, I think the best way we can be able to handle that, as we have started already, I'm seeing something like, okay, let's look it up. Sorry. So the best way we can be able to engage on that is to make sure, because we didn't know, and this pandemic has taken us, out of surprise. So now that we're in a position, I think the best way is to look at what different health policy in schools, in school. We can be able to come up with this sort of mandate as a government that every school must have an opportunity to a national school health policy, that will help students, that will help young people, give them the different counseling, just in case in the future we experience a similar thing. Liberia has experienced the issue of Ebola, so we were so fast to have closed our borders. We were so fast to have taken the COVID measure, the stringent measure of social distancing and wearing of no masks and disinfecting areas and like washing our hands. Those were things that we were so fast to conduct ourselves, because we have experienced the length of which Ebola has taken us. So schools were already familiar. Like I said, we have this national school health policy. School was already familiar of the fact that COVID was not just, Ebola was not just raging in the public in terms of outside, but in schools, in homes, those things were happening. So the national school health policy, I don't know whether Nigeria has had it or Sub-Saharan Africa has it, but the national school health policy is something that was excellently as an excellent intervention that we use in schools that help young people who are mentally disturbed in terms of this pandemic, to settle them and give them the different counseling along the way. Beyond that, like I said again, as a government, in terms of employability, as a government, what we can do is to look deeper into safety net. And I think looking deeper into safety net is the way forward. Is the way forward to put the money in the pocket of young people, is the way forward to ensuring that young people are pushed into the labor market. positively, and that is the that is the surest way I think we can be able to transition. Into this situation that we have experienced as COVID, and Liberia has a very good perspective of it because we have experienced Ebola, and Ebola has given us a signal of how we should conduct ourselves. I hope that answers your question. If not, I can say with detail.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you both so much. I believe we have Mr. Prakash back with us. Would you have anything to add to Mr. Johnson's comments?
My sincerest apologies again about the network issues. I'm really sorry about this, but do you mind making me aware of what was the question on? Sorry.
Ruth, do you want to pose your question again?
Okay, that's okay. My question was how we conducted a research on youth well-being and how the COVID-19 has impacted their well-being, their education, their social interaction, and some other areas. And so my question was, how does this outcome pre and post COVID-19, like this impact on different areas of their life, how does it align with your own policies, like in your from your government, or I don't know, your organization? How does it align with your organization's policies and goals on global youth development?
Okay, thank you for that. I think
I think we lost Mr. Prakash again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the next speaker on my screen. So Abdul, would you like to ask Mr. Johnson any questions?
First of all, thank you very much, Laura. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you very much. And also thank you very much to our expert panelists for their time and for providing me an opportunity to participate in this interactive session. Briefly, I am Abdul Rahman from Pakistan. I am currently working as assistant professor at the Department of Epidemiology and Public Health. And I am a member of the Global Wellbeing team. Our team basically assessed the impact of COVID-19 on the well-being of youth, and we jotted down our recommendations based on our findings. And in summary, we found that the education, mental health, and livelihood, all three components were significantly affected by this COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, I have just seeing that from last couple of days, there are multiple other researchers under the umbrella of YAR research initiative by UNESCO. They have conducted multiple studies and they have also found similar results. So my question is that what should be the way forward, or what measures basically should be taken by the government to minimize the impact of COVID-19, particularly on the livelihood of youth, especially in the low and low middle income countries? Although this applies to the developed countries, but mainly I think this has affected the livelihood of low and low middle income countries. So what should be the way forward, and how what kind of measures the government should take to minimize the impact?
Yeah, so like you said, in terms of livelihood, I can speak to the kind of intervention Liberia has taken on, and I think we can take cue from what Liberia has taken on in terms of livelihood. And globally, like I said, globally, when we saw the COVID, we saw President Biden offering a stimulus package to Americans, and by and large, that helped seriously to the population of America. But then I was in Chicago when that was happening. So for Liberia, what we thought, like what our pieces of advice we're gonna share with the government is that just as the United States was taking on stimulus for all Americans, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the fiscal space. There's this whole issue of comparative, competitive priorities. There are different priorities in government. So when you sit at the policy level, you see too many things coming. You see the protection of rule of law. You see the justice system. You see something like sexual gender-based violence. For young women and girls. You see agriculture. You see education. You see health. So too many things are competing priorities. So what we think was important was that to have advised the government was like again, I said something that, but a targeted one to vulnerable communities. That is the level who component of it. Like young people who are involved into entrepreneurship, and that is the way to go, because if you give young people like Liberia, what we did was that we look at vulnerable young people, in the different communities. We have an intervention called beaches and waterways. So young people will experience the sanitary environment, having the environment very clean, and then government be able to give them little incentives for cleaning their environment. They use that as an opportunity to better off themselves and give them the combine that with some sort of connected behavioral skills, education, and be able to know the impact of COVID and know to what extent COVID, could further endanger their safety. So they have such an opportunity, and beyond that, we look at youth in agriculture. That is young people who are in the rural areas and coming up with different produce. Government incentivize what they are doing, and then they have an addition to increase productivity, and then have opportunity to employ more young people who are involved into these different entrepreneurship, like producing hair products and those different things. Young people, the government target them and then give them little incentives that make themselves better off. Their businesses better off, where they can be able to employ more young people. From a safety net perspective, that is where government, was kind of falling in line with helping young people. And I think that is the surest way to go, because if our focus is the fact that we young people, experiencing in terms of astronomical increase in terms of our population in Africa, we should be able to focus on how we can be able to reduce poverty, how we can be able to have interventions that kind of positively impacting the life of young people in terms of their livelihood. And those different things, well, what was mentioned, what government have had to help young people. Looking at sexual gender-based violence, young people who, because it's tough. Sometimes you see in the city it's different from what is happening in the interior, in the rural areas. That is the toughest part of it, because our research, sometimes you don't know how things happen. You can conduct the best research, but when you sit at the policy level, at the table, you have not had the opportunity to go in the rural areas. You don't know what young people experience in the rural areas. All of the missed opportunity, all of the different environment young people experience, what health, what education, those different things, employment opportunity, those different things that they experience. So when you targeted them, we believe that it has to be livelihood. And you just talk about education, you talk about health. Focus on like health, you talk about mental health. It's very little, or I know that globally those are things that affect young people, but in Africa, specifically, I don't know what I don't know about some part of the world, but for Liberia, I think the whole aspect and the focus has been livelihood. That is the focus, that is the way to go, and that is how government have had an opportunity to directly impact those young people. There are tons of other different government assistance programs that they have had that have impacted the life of young people. I could share that with you. I may not have the opportunity to say everything, but I could share that with you as as a step up to what I have said about how government have had intervention in those areas.
Thank you very much, Johnson, for mentioning all the activities which basically government is doing for the well-being of youth. I think it seems commendable. So my follow-up question would be: are there any mechanisms or studies or follow-up like all the activities which government is doing? Is there like what is the impact of that to measure or to assess the impact of all those policies or activities which government is doing? Are there any mechanism to assess that?
Well, yes, so looking by and large, again, like I said, when we returned, we thought that it was important that before you carry on intervention, there must be this RCT conducted to know the foundation of how the intervention is like in which sector of young people experiencing the worst, and how you can be able to direct your intervention in that level. For example, there's this a program called social economic empowerment and employment for disadvantaged youth. Government have, because when we focus our studies, we don't focus our studies on, I mean, when I say we, I mean those are in the policy lab, like research lab. Your analysis is not focused on those young people who are disadvantaged. For example, those young people who are involved into drugs, addiction, and those young people who are outside of your model. Your model is only capturing those young people who are in school. Those, because if you are in school, you have that that sense of capture, and if there's any reason for which you are not in school, mentally it has an impact on you. You are not be able to transition from graduation to the labor market. But look at young people who are disadvantaged, who are on drugs. So the government has come up with some sort of study called social empowerment opportunity for young people, for disadvantaged young people. And that have established a foundation of how our intervention should be like. And I can share that paper with you. We realized that the civil war that occurred in our country, the almost 15 years of civil war, has had some sort of mental implication on young people. So we created an opportunity that those young people who are taking drugs, we combine all of the line ministries and agencies, into one sector. For example, the Ministry of Health is there to carry on the detoxification of young people who are involved into drugs. The Ministry of Education are there to give them some sort of some sort of educational skills. And Ministry of Education, Ministry of Youth and Sports is also there to give them the livelihood skills. For example, the technical vocational education and training as a way forward. That is where I think our research has not focused, our model have not captured them. So by and large, yes, we do have interventions that found on the basis of evidence, and that is how we use as scaled up to the larger, the larger or broader majority of the Liberian people. So yes, what I'm talking about focus on just Maserado, but we are using that as a pilot. What we use that as a pilot, and then we're using what we have had in Maserado as a broader majority of intervention, like intervention are going to capture the 15 political subdivision of our country. But I can share that with you and show you the impact, of how we use, how evidence is at a foundation of our intervention. I hope that answers you, Abdul.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. Did that answer all of your questions for the moment, Abdul?
No, from my side, it's okay.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, the next person I see on my screen is Max. If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, please. Thank you, Laura. I hope I'm loud and clear.
You are, yes.
All right, so thank you for everyone who has opened the floor and contributed to this. And of course, thank you, Johnson, for that elaborate, insight into some of these issues. So our team, of course, my name is Max Amana from Uganda. I am an economist, and I'm also part of the global well-being team, where we are investigating the impact of COVID-19 on the well-being of the youth. So in different aspects, including education, economic well-being, and then mental health. So the findings from the survey or from the research are geared towards the fact that the majority of the respondents were negatively, of course, impacted. Their mental health was negatively impacted. So that's why pushing forward, there is need for recovery policies and, of course, sustainable policies that can be put in place to make sure that we do not only recover from this shock, but also prepare for the future shocks that could potentially come from any other endemic, pandemic, or disaster. So, and in preparation for this, there's an agreement that this variation is not the same from different parts of the world, from different continents, people who come from different backgrounds. So I am actually interested in how these policies can be made more beneficial to the young people from the low-income families, from low-income countries. So my question to you is that how can these policies to address the mental health directly target the youth from low and middle income families in the developing countries?
Right. Okay. So excellent question. And what I think is the way forward is that, I mean, like, your research is excellent, and if you look at the recommendations, all of your recommendations are pointed into an excellent direction. But one thing that should come to our mind is that, again, like I said, in my previous conversation, was that there are competing priorities in government. Government has very many competing priorities, and how these recommendations to be aligned with government policies is of the fact that, like, you recommended the health ministry and Ministry of Education work together. That's what the government of Liberia, is doing. The World Bank has assisted us with 200 guidance counselors that are being coordinated by the Ministry of Education to all of the different high schools in the country. So that alone could give a good perspective of how our educational policy, our education policy should be like, and how those different measures, those different recommendations that you have allowed could be incorporated within our educational intervention, as well as our health intervention. And we're talking about Africa. We're not talking about different places. We're talking about Africa that have had, Africa that have had this whole issue of health crisis, and we don't have sufficient health facility, and it's not just Liberia, but Africa as a whole. There was a few years back, Professor Jeffrey Sachs was somewhere in Zimbabwe and Malawi, and we saw his research about like two patients to a bed, 2 patients to a bed. So those are different things that, and those patients were not old people, those patients were young people. So if we can look at our health policies, and have this coordination, government institutions cannot operate by itself or on its own. There must be some sort of collaboration. Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, combine, they come together, have this serious conversation, and express those different situations that affect young people in terms of education, in terms of health, and coordinate that in terms of our policy intervention. That, I think, is the surest way to which our institution, Africa, that's a low-income country. That's where I think we can be able to advance, so that tomorrow, if we experience something more deadly than the COVID, we would be able to have this shock absorber that we already prepare ourselves. Like I said, one of the simplest case study was Liberia. What we have experienced, our COVID, our Ebola situation. You saw Liberia was on the map. Liberia was on the map in terms of death rate of Ebola. Liberia was hit severely hard, and government honestly matters a whole lot because there are funding that should be able, that during the time we were experiencing this Ebola situation, international community directed funding to our health sector. Those funding, corruption has been fundamentally issue, as a serious issue in Africa too. And I know the successes of African government is not on the basis of morals, but corruption is also a foundation of why we're not experiencing what we're experiencing. And I think if we have some sort of serious consequences of those who are involved into sappooning and funneling state resources and resources that are directed to educate, to help. If we have had the opportunity to use all of those resources that were directed to our health sector, like the different facilities that are being constructed, we would have been somewhere, I think, far better off. But unfortunately, we did not experience that. So the COVID is almost like a new situation, that caught us by surprise. But we should have been like better adjusted. The only thing that helped us was the intelligence of the fact that what we experienced, the Ebola, we know how to conduct ourselves in terms of social distancing. We know how to, the health protocols. We're very, concerned about aligning with those different health protocols. And we know the consequences of what has happened to us if we don't align with doctor advice. Ministry of Health, system measure. If we don't abide by that, we know the consequences you have for us. But on a policy level, I think it has to do more about coordination, cooperation, like Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health coming together and synergizing their different, interventions and be able to, that can be able to positively affect the life of young people. If we don't do that, I think we may probably be heading for something different, and we may not be able to be in the capacity or the position to absorb, the shock. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any follow-up questions there, Max?
No, that was explicitly and comprehensively answered very well. So thank you, Johnson, especially for bringing the experience of Liberia, because I can very much relate from Uganda and coming from the African continent, and of course coming from one of the developing countries, so I could relate it very well. So for now, I'll pass it to the next person until probably I'll chip in later. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you, Johnson.
Thank you so much. Just because I see that we have a few new audience members, I want to give one more reminder just to announce this again. But if you are interested, if you've joined us as an audience member and you're interested in asking any questions to our policy expert here today, Mr. Mubla Johnson, please, there's 3 steps to follow. So first of all, use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, and then please write your name in the chat and then your question in the chat, and we'll bring you right on up. But at this time, I'd like to continue going through the order of our youth researchers who have some questions. So it looks like Afifa is next on my list. If you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, am I audible, Laura?
Yes, you are. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So this is Afifa Anjum from Bangladesh. I'm a researcher of the Global Wellbeing team. So I'd like to thank my team members for their super hard work and the presentation yesterday. And I would also like to thank our supervisor, Sue, for her constant monitoring and supervision and mentoring. So my question is to Mr. Johnson is that in our study and several studies conducted during the COVID-19 pandemic, we can see that youths are going through different types of mental health problems, and post-traumatic stress disorders, depression, anxiety, stress are quite prevalent among the youths. You have already talked about different interministerial collaboration, but my question is how this interministerial collaboration is going to make the access and quality of mental health services increase in countries, both in developed and developing countries.
Yeah, Thank you, Alpha. That was an excellent question, and where I think we can be able to target middle or low income country in terms of collaborations, interministerial collaborations, and the efficiency of that. I think by and large it's eventually helpful from the perspective of, okay, so when you are in a policy lab, it's different from when you are in the position of making the policies, because you are not faced with the competing priorities. You're not faced with any competing priorities. You have a focus on what you have to research about. When I was in Chicago, I was researching about the impact of sexuality, conflict, and violence in Côte d'Ivoire, looking at Mali and Burkina Faso, violence spillover in Côte d'Ivoire. So that was a specific research question or research direction, and I was researching in the scope of what I have. Unfortunately, when you're around the policy table, you are faced with different priorities. And when I say interministerial collaboration, it's in the sense that the Ministry of Education has different competing priorities, and that is for low and middle income countries. That is what we have fixed. That is what we have experienced for the length of time we have been around the policy table. And like the Ministry of Education have a competing priorities, like the Ministry of Health also have competing priorities, looking at maternal mortality and different other priorities that are keenly focused, that should be very much more concerned as well. When you have the opportunity to sit together as policymakers, combining those different ministries and agencies, you have an opportunity. Representation is also very important. It's also key, in our intervention, because it's someone who is a young person and who have had, like what Liberia has done, giving young people the opportunity to the policy table, to the policy space, because it's not only that research has informed our perspective, but also experience has informed our perspective. I grew up in a community where most of my friends have become disadvantaged. When I say disadvantaged in the perspective, they are experiencing some sort of mental problem. They are on drugs, they're on alcohol, those different things. So unless I have the opportunity to sit around the table, then I can form the perspective of those who are around the table as a policymaker, that we are experiencing these things, other than the research, that has been conducted. So I think it's more efficient. I think it gave us a broader understanding of how we can be able to carry on our intervention by coming around the table, as policymakers, and to a larger extent, let the policymakers and those institutions, that are those CSO, civil society organizations, institutions that are responsible for disseminating and some sort of intervention, because government cannot be able to occupy the entire place. The government intervention cannot be able to cover all the broader majority, like a Pareto efficient policy, making more people, like not everybody being so better off, only a few people being better off. So when the market failure occurs, those institutions that are also on the side, those institutions that are like civil society organizations, if you have, as a government, as a policymaker, having face-to-face interaction with these institutions, it gives you the opportunity to incorporate some of what they have experienced, some of what their interventions are at the lower scale. It gives you an opportunity to incorporate them into your intervention, in terms of education, in terms of health. Those are the surest way I think we can be able to, have a broader perspective of how efficient it should be. And I hope that answers the questions on Afra.
Afifa, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question so thoroughly, and I think that youth empowerment is so necessary during in the post-COVID world, and in case of tackling the future pandemic also. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and thank you, Laura, for taking me.
Yes, of course.
Thank you
I
so
also
much.
want I also want to introduce, we have a new panelist with us here right now. Her name is Suhail Kamoun. If you want to introduce yourself, that would be wonderful to our audience. We're struggling a little bit with audio, but give us 1 second to try to resolve that issue. And in the meantime, Aisha, if you want to ask your question.
Hi, am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Hi, good evening from India. My name is Aisha Priyadashini Mohanty, and I'm the co-team lead for UNESCO Youth Researchers Asia Pacific team on youth wellbeing. I am grateful to be a part of this conversation and engage with the panelists today. As a part of our research focus, we looked into the perceived barriers that university students in the Asia Pacific region face. And our research has shown that in the region, 63% of young people had noted negative effect of mental health, and particularly for this group, stigma emerged as a key barrier in accessing mental health services. So I know Mr. Johnston has mentioned about collaborative spaces between various ministries as well. However, I am curious to learn and understand that whether the governments across the world and policymakers would really look forward in setting up specific mental health ministries and specifically targeting stigma reduction. Could we possibly coordinate and work together with Ministry of Technology, since the world is moving towards digital mental health services and making universal health care coverage for their citizens. So how can we really tackle this through community advocacy by setting up these specific ministries? Do you think it's feasible, and would you be able to support the same?
Well, yes, I think that is excellent. And I think there's one thing we have to focus on here is the fact that if there's some sort of situation, we are very fast. We are very fast to create, institutions that are going to be able to take on, those different situations that we experience, and this has led us to more situation of not looking at the source of how this is happening, and I think our laws are the first target of where we should be looking at. I think our laws, if we look at our regulations, especially for those who have mental disabilities, that is the whole focus of our direction. And I think if we stress on more focus on our laws and how we can be able to efficiently, execute our laws, there have been infrastructure set up, there have been laws on the book, but to enforce those laws has become a serious situation, and that should be our focus. And that is, I think, that is the responsibility of civil society organizations. Government with this focus, and you have to get this, because with this focus of different priorities, if CSOs are not working to ensure that they can pressure government, even though it doesn't sound responsible enough that people should tell you what you're supposed to be doing, but I think it's part of the public policy. I think it makes government more efficient, as it should be. If you run a country and you have everybody singing praise and worship to you, and you don't have people who looking at things objectively, it becomes different. It becomes difficult. It becomes, because you will continue to pay along the line. You will not be able to, by and large, achieve the general perspective of things. When you have someone who sits outside and look at things objectively, then you can be able to correct those different wrongs, that you're experiencing. So the focus more on CSO, if we raise those issues for as much as possible, it becomes better that government take it very seriously. and our problem has not been the fact that we don't have infrastructure to take on those different bases. You know, we should focus more. I think two things: our laws, enforcing those different regulations efficiently, and making sure that those who are in the CSO, those who are outside of government, you know, are more efficient on how they can be able to articulate those different things and engage government. You know, face on. It's not that everything is going to be fun. I mean, everything is going to be better off if you allow government to take on whole intervention. Government does not have the microscope or list of things to view all different, you know, different viruses that affect young people or affect the population. But these CSOs can play an efficient role in ensuring that government are reminded about what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. Because government, by and large, except for the West, you know, except for Europe and America, government in Africa is very limited, on a very limited scope. They don't have intervention in terms of evidence base, you know. So it is more dependent on those international organizations, those local organizations, those civil society organizations, to be able to come up with evidence. Say, oh no, this intervention is kind of evidence based. If we go in this direction, you know, we're going to be able to achieve at a broader majority, at a broader perspective of things, than to go, you know, the other way where you have only a few people going to benefit from your intervention. So let's go this way. So I think, yes, we could talk about creating new institutions that can be able to take on those different situations. But by and large, if we look at our regulations and CSO are more active enough, you know, to raise those different issues, I think we should be good in terms of our intervention. And I hope that answers your question, Mom.
That's it. I just wanted to follow up also on that question, because specifically you were mentioning how unemployment and the livelihood of people, young people specifically, are being impacted because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And report has shown that, you know, the exaggeration and the fissures that the economy is facing right now, young people are more vulnerable to mental health impacts because of the same as well. And a part of our research has shown that 44% of young people believe that the cost of mental health treatment is extremely high, because of which they are unable to access these services. So do you see in the future government setting up a substantial part of their national budget towards setting up these and supporting the mental health care? Because currently the governments are spending almost 1% or 2%, and that is not enough to provide for outcome based on the same as well. So how do you think that, you know, governments can in the future include the aspirations of young people, as you mentioned, leading them in policy making, and also provide them requisite funding towards setting up these mental health ministries?
Yes, again, you are so correct. Not just your research is correct, but the International Labour Organization is also correct that young people experiencing serious level, I mean, that the impact of COVID, you know, has seriously negatively impacted young people in the labor market, beginning for education, delay their graduation, and delay their, you know, their transition into the labor market. Those different things, I mean, are clearly happening. And again, if you look at government budget, government different priorities, the budget determines, you know, government seriousness towards situations, you know, that unfold. You know, if you look at mental health services, if you look at less than 5% of the budget being directed to mental health services, it means the government is not taking on mental health services seriously. So I think, like, again, I want to repeat myself on this one. I think the role of CSO, government budget, is not a closed initiative. It's an open initiative. And if you look at those things, you can be able to call government to book that these are things that we are experiencing, and you have to take it seriously. And when you are taking it seriously, it is reflected within your budget. This is how some other intervention has been, like in Liberia. Unemployment is hard. So how do we fight the situation of unemployment? Okay, so if we look at institutions that are reducing unemployment, that are creating employability for young people, if we give them incentives, they increase their productivity as a result of incorporating more young people into the labor market, employing more young people. So there are youth organizations like the Federation of Liberian Youth, like the Liberal National Student Union, like the Mano River Union Youth Parliament, institutions that are more youth-driven, encourage them to have programmatic, interventions. Most often, when fundings are directed to institutions, like almost 70% of that funding is directed towards administrative costs. And then you have 30% directed towards the direct intervention. That is not how it should be, like having things the reverse. I think more of the chunk of the resources should be directed towards the intervention than administrative costs. And we pay more money to administrative costs than we pay into those direct interventions. And I think if we redesign our approach to focusing on our objective of helping more people who are affected into those areas, and like I said, the caregivers, those institutions that are involved into mental health services, if we can be able to, again, you can allow everything flows in without regulation. If you regulate them properly and direct the fact that you are operating in their scope, and this is our country in a perspective of things that we have a say in what you're doing. And you cannot raise, for example, $1 million and you have less than 100,000 directed to the direct intervention, and you have the chunk of the other money to administrative costs. We have been experiencing that. We experienced that on YOP, World Bank project, and we redesign our strategies and we focus on more interventions. I mean, the intervention take on more of the resources than the administrative costs. And if we minimize administrative costs, and increase increase our financial strength in terms of the direct intervention, we should be going good. That's so bad feedback. Someone has to mute.
Yeah, we'll fix that. Go ahead and keep talking.
Yeah, so I'm so sorry. Like I'm using AirPods, so with the feedback disturbed me so badly. So yeah, if we focus on that, if we focus on the perspective of things that administrative costs cannot take on all of the chunk of the resources, but those who are carrying on, those caregivers, if they are properly regulated, they are efficiently regulated, and that whatever they are receiving in the space is directed directly towards those that are being affected, then we should be good on that perspective of things. And again, we look at the national youth policy, and I think all countries have some alignment towards that. Look at different policies that guide international organizations' behavior on how they operate into the space. We have in Liberia, we have the national youth policy, and I think in Africa we have the African Youth Chapter that combines, that mandates member states to have this national youth policy. And I think in Asian Pacific and in Europe, they too have policies that drive youth development initiatives. So if we follow those different policies and regulations that drive youth development initiatives, and we are very stringent on those things, it gives us an opportunity to have, to affect a broader majority of the people, that we provide supervision for, than to, allow things played on, and we just expect the fact that, things going to happen, that something is going to happen out of the blue moon. I think we need to put our boots on the soil, hands on the deck, to ensure that those institutions are supported, those institutions are involved in the mental health services are supported, and not only that they are supported, but they are also regulated in ensuring that at the end result, we can have people, we can reduce the percentage of mental illness in our society. That should be my own contribution towards that. And I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you for answering.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I also now want to try to go back to Suhail and Turaya, if you're able to unmute and speak now. I know that your hand was raised, so we want to give you an opportunity to speak if you're able. We'll just wait a few more seconds here to see if we can get another opinion. In the meantime, while we're waiting, do any of our team members throughout the YAR teams who are here with us today have any other questions for Mr. Johnson that have arisen while you've been listening to the questions of other YAR participants, or just as you've been reflecting more on the topic today?
I hope I'll have the opportunity to ask you guys questions too.
Oh, yes, of course. Let's go with that. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so how, because I did data analytics at the University of Chicago. So how do you guys see your recommendation in terms of counterfactual, in terms of all of the research you guys have done? How do you look at the counterfactual?
Would anybody like to share their thoughts there? Ruth, Max, Abdul, Ayesha?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part of the question, please. If you could repeat.
Yeah. So I said, you know, when I was at the policy lab in Chicago, I did data analytics. So I like the fact that we play with data and it form our perspective of how our intervention should be like. But we are also mindful of the counterfactual. So how do you think the perspective of your different recommendations does that fall in the perspective of counterfactual?
Any thoughts from our youth researchers here? Ruth, Max, Abdul, Ayesha? Would you be able to put your question in the chat and repeat it again, Mr. Johnson? I think there's some difficulties hearing the question.
I can text you though.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can.
So while we're waiting again, I see that a few more people have joined in our audience today. If you are interested, we still do have a little less than 20 minutes in this session. If you are interested in asking any questions that you might have today for our policy expert, we have Mr. Mulba Johnson with us today. If you have any questions, there are 3 steps we'd like to ask you to follow. The first would be to use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. The second would be to please type your name into the chat. And then the third would be to actually ask your question. So I think I have a few questions coming in live right now, but I am going to try to pass over the communication to Suhail. If you would like to speak and try again speaking, please unmute at this time. Wonderful. If you'd be able to speak. Okay, I don't think we hear any sound. I do want to give Mr. Johnson a chance to type his question into the chat. So we'll wait a few more seconds for that. So I appreciate everybody's patience that we can have a little bit more of a dialogue between the youth researchers and our policy expert here today, Mr. Mulba Johnson. He had a question for our youth researchers, but we've been having a little bit of a difficult time hearing. So he will be typing in the chat to everyone. So just make sure that when you're sending that chat, Mr. Johnson, that you hit everyone so that it's going to everybody in attendance today. So just give us a few more minutes here. We appreciate your patience. While we're waiting for Mr. Johnson to put his question in the chat, I do want to remind everyone that we do have two more remaining sessions after this today. And you are welcome to engage in the platform. We really encourage you to engage. But again, we do have one more research to action session for 2 different teams following this. And then of course we have our closing plenary as well. So I do see that Mr. Johnson has put his question into the chat. So for our youth researchers, the question is, if we are so sure of our intervention, why, if our policy recommendation falls in the bracket of a counterfactual? Is that clear to everybody? So if we are so sure of our intervention, why is it that our policy recommendation falls in the bracket of a counterfactual? Any thoughts here? Any clarifying questions?
Well,
Go
thank
ahead,
you,
Ruth.
Laura. And thank you, Mr. Johnson, for the question. Well, if I may, I think what might be the problem is that sometimes we don't really ask the right set of people the questions. Like when we do our researches, like I'm not saying like the one we conducted now. Sometimes when other people do their researches, they don't really go to the actual people who are most affected by their research team. And so we make recommendations based on a very small sample size, and which we might not be able to generalize. That's the word I'm trying to get, like generalization of a research recommendation. Some might, because we come from different contexts, like we examine in a situation about global youth well-being. Yes, the way it affects people in the European countries, like in the West and all that, it's not the same way it affected people in the African countries. And so when we make recommendations, we made recommendations based on just the responses we got from our research questions. And so making those recommendations, it doesn't really show the actual picture of what is happening in the developing countries or the underdeveloped worlds. And so that might, in some instance, result in a counterfactual, like you rightly positioned it. Thank you.
Yeah, that is so excellent. That is so excellent. And that prepares our mind. I have Professor Todmon Coleman. I have Hector Bona de Mesquita from the University of Chicago, who taught me political economic or public policy and data analytics. So there's one way where we make generalization and we don't understand the fact that, we may probably understand, but to the extent for which we understand is not as sufficient enough if we had this experience, and that's where we think something was different so something was missing out of the model, because if we pitch our research and our research falls on different soils, it becomes different, because if we follow your recommendation and the intervention is done on this side, it becomes difficult for, because you don't know what has happened in our society, what we have experienced, and there might be some sort of infrastructure, there must be some sort of structural approach in terms of how other countries are better off by that intervention. There might be some sort of limitation to other countries, because there's no one size fits all, So as policymakers, sometimes the skepticism becomes greater. But it's always important to have a measure of what our intervention should be like, and I think that is the real side of the research. It gives you a good understanding of how the intervention is going to be like, and who the intervention is going to affect. That gives us a good shape of how it should be. And I think that is what is so important, that policymakers are kind of informed about research-based intervention. But the whole limitation of the fact is that we are in different contexts. There are some contexts that have very weak early childhood foundation. There are some contexts that have very strong early childhood foundation. And if you have a weak early childhood foundation and your intervention is for the youth, for example, we experienced 14 years of civil war. I was born May 10, 1989, and I'm 32 years old. And if you remove 15 years from my age, I become 17 years old. So you have an intervention for me that 15 years that I never experienced any good childhood upbringing. You know, it was so unfortunate that we were into war. Like being born into the war and lacking all those basic social, you know, necessity, you know, of a good upbringing. Look at social, emotional, and cognitive skills. You know, look at effort for control and executive functions. You know, look at the brain development. Look at the neonatal, you know, the prenatal. Look at those things. You know, the early development. So if the intervention is not of the fact that it takes into consideration, you know, the broader perspective of what the country is, how the country has gotten involved into certain, you know, level, and we are so sure of the fact that we should advance this intervention. We should do this because this is the surest way. This is evidence based. Then we get lost on the whole part. And this is where people who are very knowledgeable, you know, push us from one side to the other because of the fact that they say, okay, then we have very major competing priorities. Like people are dying. We need to focus on maternal mortality. You bringing youth development initiative, you bringing employment opportunity. Yes, we can focus on that. But in the hospitals, you have 2 patients to a bed. That is no model. That is exactly what is happening. That is physical experience. We're experiencing that. It's not part of the model. You know, so it becomes so different, complex. I mean, so extremely complex that sometimes we are so sure about our research. We are so sure about what we are advancing as our intervention, and by and large, it becomes something different. You know, so that was the foundation. Many people can throw in, but I think you excellently answered, you know, the question, and that falls into the whole perspective of why it is important that you not be so sure and so true to yourself that this intervention is going to carry us to the truest of time, because you don't know what is on ground. You don't know the complexity, you know, how things flow. You know, there are other countries that how do you call it, where you have this young man, Bobby Wine, Uganda, right? Look at Uganda. You know the amount of young people that are affected by what is going on in Uganda? It's not that I'm kind of picking on, but the fact is, if we are so sure of our intervention, there are people who care less about what our interventions are, you know, except for you have the opportunity to go to policy school and do research and understand to what extent you need to match that with, you know, with those who are at the policy table. And if we drive in that direction, it becomes so suitable for us, it becomes so comfortable for us. But if we are only of the perspective of things that we went to policy school, went to research school, and this is all we need, once we do this and everything becomes okay, we should be maybe going somewhere different. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I do want to just look at the time quickly, so that we do have just under 8 minutes now. And I do want to pass it on to both, who else has their hand raised? Abdul has their hand raised. Oh, okay, I guess that's it. All right, so Abdul and Aisha. So in order to fit both of those in, if we could keep responses to about like 2 minutes or so, just so that we can get both questions. Abdul, if you'd like to go first.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. I think this is a very nice and genuine question, and the question is basically related to the generalizability of the results. We actually conduct research and we extrapolate results to the whole community. So like I am an epidemiologist, and we face this many times, and we criticize different studies. Like people, what they do, they estimate prevalence of any disease in a specific territory, and they select the number of animals which are already suspected or showing somehow clinical signs of that particular disease. And then they say, okay, the prevalence was 50%, which in epidemiology means that 1 out of every 2 individuals are positive with that disease. And basically their study is limited only to those animals which are, or to those human beings which are suspected for that particular disease and not for the general public. So this is a very big dilemma that many times people, they conduct study and they don't discuss the limitations of their study or the biases which they have faced or their study could have faced. And one point, Ruth, she also very clearly mentioned about the sample size, like people, they do on a small sample and then they want to publish that study in a good research journals, and then they ask that if the study is for a localized, then you should not publish it for in a good journal. So they wanted to publish in good journals, and then they extrapolate their results to a bigger community so that it will have a good impact. But that caused basically problem. So the research or the models Johnson was discussing should be customized for each community. And like in our research, what we highlighted or at least mentioned in our report, that our study was there was also a bias of related to the sample selection, particularly like it was an online survey, and those students or youth who do not have access to the online platforms, they of course could not have filled that questionnaire. So same in my country, like if I see the livelihood is mainly affected for those who actually don't have access to the internet. So they are the students, they have just graduated, then they are doing some job, say, so they were much affected, but they could not participate, or they could not you can say fill out our survey questionnaire. So these could be the limitations and biases, and he correctly mentioned that we should consider those all types of biases, and we should at least include in our report or research that this could be the bias, and so our results should be only for this type of community.
Yeah, Abdul, that is so excellent. You know, so I think that set the whole benchmark of what we're talking about. You know, and research I conducted by those who will go online and fill out questionnaires, but there's a vast majority of the people who have no access to internet. You know, who do not even have the opportunity to a laptop. You know, need to even mention a mobile phone. So that's the basics, that we cannot be so sure of how we carry. And this is a very big platform. This is a very huge intervention, and our intervention must kind of focus by and large on I mean a clear cut one. Like, for example, the World Bank help us, and we have employability opportunity for young people, somewhere around 15,000 young people. So if those 15, because what I thought that I should do is the fact that we need some sort of on ground evidence-based initiative, and that evidence-based initiative must be backed by research study, and that research study must focus on which percentage of our country population experience the worst situation. If we focus on those who on the internet, those are the people in the larger numbers that are affected. And I'm just saying something because I'm not throwing or then on our research. I'm just saying that those who we focus our interventions on have to be people who are in a larger number affected. Because if we use smaller samples and they are not the scope of people who are affected, then our intervention is going to be wrong. Let us look at the broader perspective of things. And I think it's good that we have this experience and this research background collaborating, so that if you put it along the way, that is not in the model. On a serious note, that is not in the model. When I was in Chicago and we were doing all of those different research, they will all come back to me and say, "Oh, Emmanuel, what is happening on ground? What is happening on ground is not in the model, and what is in the model is not exactly what is happening on ground." So we have to focus on how we can collaborate with the experience, combining with the research, and we can have good interventions along the way. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are nearing the end of this session. I know time went by so quickly. So I know, Aisha, you had your hand up. There are other ways to chat through the platform. So I really encourage you to look at that. You're able to chat with the other participants. So really look into that. I want to invite Suhail one last time to try to speak. And if not, then I would also invite you to utilize the platform functioning. Suhail, if you want to try speaking. All right. Well, we really appreciate your attendance. Again, please, Suhail, try to connect through the chat. There are so many ways to engage on the platform. To everybody here, this was such an amazing conversation, really great teams here. The follow-up questions really show the critical thinking and passion for this topic that everybody has, and a force for driving change. So phenomenal session, truly. Thanks to everybody for their participation in this session. I really think it was an opportunity for us to gain more background here together on how to present these recommendations and how the research and the data ties into everything, to be able to gain the attention of policymakers, which will inform the dialogue with policymakers that will happen sometime in the coming months. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, again, thanks everyone for your engagement today. Thanks to all of our teams. Special thanks to Mr. Muba Johnson for joining today. And Suhail, we really appreciate you trying to join. And again, please utilize that chat function to connect with our teams here. We do encourage you to stay tuned for the remaining sessions today. We're just about to be ending this knowledge sharing meeting of our 3-day sessions, but thank you to everyone for your continued engagement, to our UNESCO team and organizers. Really take the time to explore the platform. I can't encourage you enough to do that. It's an amazing platform. And I wish all of you a pleasant morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much.